You were a prophet. I'm sorry you were a prophet. Last week on the program when you said these things can go very big, very fast, and in fact, this one has. What's your assessment of the danger degree at this point?
I think it's still very concerning, deeply concerning, Hugh. Now, let's put it in perspective on a scale that kind of runs from Spanish influenza 100 years ago, which infected 40% of the world's population and had a mortality rate of 20%. Let's call that kind of the dark end of the spectrum. At the other end is just another bad flu season. We're kind of parked in the middle here. I think the best analog at the moment, and let's hope it stays this contained, would be what happened with Ebola virus in Western Africa, which deeply affected three relatively small countries, killed thousands, but not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. But this thing is still going vertical in China. And whether or not China has the resources to control it remains to be seen. And certainly cases are popping globally. Now, I'm scheduled to fly to Singapore, for example, in about 2 weeks, and I am starting to focus very deeply on this, as I'm sure many international travelers are. So multiply that times hundreds of thousands of people debating whether to get on airplanes. You're going to see the global economy really see impact here if this thing stretches out. So we're in a dangerous period right now. We ought to be focusing on doing everything we can scientifically, and also in the traditional means of control, which are quarantine. And that's what you're going to see much more of, I think, over the weeks ahead.
You know, Admiral, you and I were together at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda not long ago. And yesterday I had the team there run a model where we dropped off 20% and 50% in visitorship because so much of our visitorship is from abroad. And, it's devastating to a little museum, a museum that does very well and financially is sound, but still a museum. I wonder what it will do to national and international economic transfers that are typically associated with travel if, in fact, people begin to postpone travel.
Oh, exactly. And the event that I'm going to in Singapore is already considering that. And it's a big event with a lot of international activity. And that's just one very small example of what could multiply. What is worth considering at the moment, which many folks are not thinking about, is ultimately what is the role of the military in something like this, something you and I talk about a fair amount. I've had some experience with this dealing with cholera in Haiti when I was commander of U.S. Southern Command, and I watched very closely as my fellow combatant commanders dealt with Ebola in West Africa. Here's the good news, Hugh. The U.S. military and many militaries have a lot of capability they can bring to bear against something like this. Obviously, medical establishments, but also logistics, power generation, water, ability to guard and execute quarantines. Again, that's at the dark end of the spectrum. We're not remotely there yet, but I would guess our combatant commanders who apportion and operate our forces globally are dusting off their contingency plans for dealing with pandemics.
Now, Admiral, a few facts for our audience. China said Wednesday that 132 people had died from the virus, and they confirmed their case count went up 25% overnight to 5,974. Great Britain has suspended flights, direct flights to mainland China. Germany has 4 cases of domestic transmission, meaning a visitor from China entered a German shop, infected someone there who went on to infect 3 other people. That's the sort of domestic transmission that worries people. And there are, I believe, 8 countries with coronavirus, and a plane load of people from China now leaving Anchorage, headed for Moreno Valley to the Old March Air Force Base. Tom Cotton yesterday called for the suspension of all flights from China because it's an asymptomatic disease while contagious for 10 to 14 days. That's what we believe at this point. Do you agree with Senator Cotton, Admiral?
It is certainly number one on the list of measures that the administration should be considering. I think we're probably not quite there, but Senator Cotton, whom, as you know, I know well and respect quite a bit, typically will think ahead of the problem. He's a pretty good indicator of where events are going internationally for the administration. So I would say let's gather data for another few days. If this continues to go vertical in terms of numbers in China, and by the way, you really do have to question thousands of cases and only just over 100 deaths. That seems improbable. We'll see those numbers, I think, refined over the days ahead. But let's face it, China has every instinct on the one hand to try and shut this thing down, obviously. But on the other hand, they don't want to crater their economy, which would be the economy that would immediately feel a massive hit if other nations started taking the measures you described. So in terms of Senator Cotton's proposal, I'd say we're close, but we're not quite there yet.
All right, now let's turn to the Middle East peace process unveiled by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. The National Security Council, headed by Robert O'Brien, my dear friend who will join me on the program a little bit later today, first time since he became the NSA, put out a tweet 16 hours ago saying, quote, "This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring lasting peace to the Holy Land," close quote. Your assessment of the plan and its prospects, Admiral Stavridis?
The plan is certainly not perfect because there is no perfect plan to solve Middle East peace. But Palestine, are you listening? I'm sure the National Security Advisor is going to make this point as well. This is the best deal the Palestinians are going to get, and they need to wake up and just realize that. What this plan does is it gives them an entryway into a capital in and around Jerusalem, probably in East Jerusalem. It establishes a two-state solution, an independent, sovereign Palestine. It lays out the possibility of significant aid to the Palestinians from the United States. And it, I think, offers a real pathway toward resolving these ongoing issues. The bad news for the Palestinians, it effectively legitimizes the vast majority of the settlements. But look, that's a reality at this point. So I would say to the Palestinians, and I have visited Palestine, I've been many times in the West Bank. Part of my remit, my responsibility as Commander U.S. European Command, Hugh, was Israel and the relationships between the U.S. and the Palestinians in a security perspective. So I know this turf pretty well. This is a good deal from the perspective of the best deal the Palestinians can get. It's kind of the last exit before the tunnel. And I'll close by saying where the U.S. is headed in this, if the Palestinians don't take this deal, they are going to be marginalized in the Arab world, and the U.S. and our other Arab allies will simply continue to move the Arabs and the Israelis closer and closer together. That's why this is the last shot at it for the Palestinians.
Now, Admiral, if I were king of the forest, not queen, not duke, not earl in the Palestinian Authority, I'd take whatever was on the table. I'd double the number to $100 billion. I'd ask for a little bit more land. I'd make sure there was a contiguous corridor. I'd ask for something that Israel wasn't likely to give me, but I'd counter. I would counter. Do you think they'll counter?
Well, first of all, they need you to negotiate for them. That's to coin a phrase. That's pretty good art of the deal right there. But unfortunately, I don't see how they work themselves out of the political box they've put themselves in. And the other difficulty they have is the division between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and the Hamas government running Gaza. That's a very difficult set of imperatives to square. Here's how to solve it to the degree it can be solved. It's the Arabs, the rest of the Arab world. It is to get particularly the Saudis, the Egyptians, and Jordanians. All of them have a vested interest in this deal. We need the Arab world to put the pressure on the Palestinians, to bring them to the table. And I think, as Jared Kushner said, there is plenty of meat on the bone, I think I'm quoting him here, to negotiate. So they should counter. They could get an even better deal than is on offer. The only way to get there is to get to the table.
Now, Admiral, you and I both know Ambassador Youssef Al-Otaiba from United Arab Emirates. He's quoted in the New York Times this morning as calling the plan, quote, a serious initiative that addresses many issues raised over the years. Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a muted statement saying it appreciates the efforts of President Trump's administration to develop a comprehensive plan. Favorable comments from Bahrain, Oman, and Egypt. It does seem to me that the Sunni states are ready, willing, and able to back any counter from the Palestinian Authority.
100% agree with that. And let's face it, other than the Palestinians, those who would find this the best deal, and the Israelis, of course, because they would settle a long-standing set of border issues, are the Arab states. So I think there is a shape of a deal here. It's the key is going to be the Palestinians, and the key to the Palestinians is getting the rest of the Arab world quietly pushing. And by the way, just picture how 20 years ago, if there had been a peace plan proposed that legitimized settlements and effectively gave the Israelis a pretty good deal, the Arab world would have exploded in anger. All the streets would have been on fire. We're not remotely seeing that, and that is another indicator it ought to be to the Palestinians to take this deal, take it as in get to the table, negotiate it to the best place you can take it, and I think this one could happen.
Now, last question, Admiral. I don't know that you know Abbas. I know you don't know anything from Hamas, but Abbas is an old man, and Arafat died, and he's reviled now by history. When do people begin to realize that, life is short? If you're going to go down in the history books, don't go down in the history books as a corrupt autocrat who acquired money and forgave your people's future or traded your people's future for that money.
Right about now, in the Palestinian world, those conversations are happening, and we see them, frankly, all over the world at the moment. And this is part of why you're seeing not only what was mistakenly called the Arab Spring, but riots in a wide variety of countries against that aging generation that they feel are clinging to old ideology at the expense of the future. This will not be the last example of that. Abbas has a moment in history that he could step up and deliver for his people. I hope he takes it.